Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We've got folks on the screen who are members of the Maine Data Center Advisory Council, and we've got 100 plus folks joining us as participants in this webinar, and that number just keeps rising. We really appreciate everyone being here today. My name's David Plum, and I work with an organization called CBI, Consensus Building Institute, and I'm here with my colleague Stacy Smith from CBI, as well as Artie Halbe, and the three of us are going to help facilitate today's conversation and this overall process of the Maine Data Center Advisory Council. We're here in a webinar format because we have a high degree of interest, and this format allows us to have many participants. And then you all as a council, the folks I'm looking at here on the screen, can deliberate and have your conversations, and the folks online can observe. We'll say a little bit more going forward about the interactivity we may do with folks who are joining us, as well as other opportunities for public comment. I'll note that these meetings are being recorded, and we are very eager to have a lot of transparency about how this conversation goes forward. We recognize that's challenging for all of us as well, and so just FYI, everything is recorded here, and folks will be able to see these recordings as we go forward. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to your co-chairs and specifically to Commissioner Cunningham, Selena Cunningham from the Department of Energy Resources, who will give us an overview of what we're doing here today and what we're doing with this overall process. So, Commissioner, over to you.
Thanks, David, and good morning, everyone. And thank you very much to the council members for joining us and for committing your time to work on this important issue. And thank you to the public for joining the webinar and being part of this public process throughout the entire council process here. So the rapid growth of data centers in the US is presenting new and complex policy considerations on a wide variety of topics. And on the topic of energy, advancements in artificial intelligence that are driving data center growth represent an opportunity to improve the efficiency and performance of our energy systems, but also raise challenges with potential load growth from new data centers, cost implications, and other impacts on the operations of the electric grid that we're seeing in places around the country. In this last legislative session, the topic of data centers gained significant interest across party lines and in the public. And people are asking how future development activity could impact Maine's energy system, natural resources, economy, communities, and whether existing laws and regulations are ready to mitigate potential risks and facilitate potential benefits. And Maine is at an important place in time, acknowledging that there are data center developers here interested in opportunities in our communities, but we haven't seen substantial development break ground in Maine and to date, and like has happened elsewhere in the country. So in April, Governor Mills signed an executive order establishing the Maine Data Center Advisory Council to evaluate the complex set of issues related to the development of large-scale data centers in Maine, with a focus on minimizing environmental impacts, protecting ratepayers, and maintaining grid reliability, and enabling responsible economic development. And it's important to note that the council is focused on large-scale data centers, not the broad topic of artificial intelligence. In December 2024, the governor signed an executive order establishing the AI task force, which worked to deliver recommendations on how Maine should prepare for the rise of AI. And that task force has finalized recommendations last year, and encourage you all to take a look at that report to learn more about that. So the council, the Data Center Council, will meet over the course of 2026 to dig into these important topics, gain an understanding of what safeguards are in place today, what the market considerations are to this growing new sector, and what additional steps should be taken to protect Maine's interests. And the council represents a broad perspectives and will be informed by outside experts. We also recognize that there is substantial interest and concerns from the public, and we want to make sure the public is part of this process as well. And given the limited time together, the council will need to focus on what information is needed, how best to prioritize our efforts, and to be able to develop clear, actionable recommendations and next steps in the final report, which is due to the governor and the legislature by January 29th, 2027. And I'll turn it back to CBI for the next slides.
Great.
Great.
So Stacy, over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet you all. I'm just going to briefly review the agenda for today and then talk a little bit about how the public can contribute both today and throughout the process. And then we're going to move to some introductions of the council. So the agenda. Today's meeting has really three main parts. First is this background and introduction session that we're doing right now. And that'll, I'll give you this background and then we'll move to introductions. Next, we're going to hear an overview of the council, its scope, how it's going to work together, what it's going to produce, along with a roadmap and some information about timing. And we'll have a chance then for the council to share some visions of success. And then the bulk of the meeting will move to this overview of key topics and discussion section. That's really going to be focused on framing up what are the key topics that the council is going to be focused on throughout this process. We're going to start each of those by sharing some of the questions that we've heard already from the public. We're going to hear from the co-chairs about core focus areas and what's currently in place to safeguard in these areas, and then turn to the council to speak a little bit about their priorities, reflections, and anticipated information needs for each of these topics. Then we're going to turn back to the public participants with a live poll. And so even though you are stuck behind this wall in the webinar format, we are really going to be trying to engage your voices throughout this process. And so there will be an opportunity for you to weigh in through a live poll as you hear all of these topics to raise what's rising to the top for you and what you're hearing. And then we'll conclude the meeting by reviewing some of the next steps. Okay, so let me turn now a little bit to say a little more about public engagement and how important that is going to be through this process and then how it's going to play out in this meeting. So as you can see, and as you've already heard, engagement with the public is really important to getting some successful recommendations here, really making sure that the public has a chance to really weigh in. And so the council is going to do that in a number of ways. First, all of these meetings are going to be open to the public, and they're going to be recorded, and the recordings are going to be on YouTube. People will have a chance to stay connected with what's happening by participating or attending these meetings. There's then going to be surveys that are going to happen throughout the process. We started this with a survey prior to this first meeting that asked people about questions they had, and those questions really helped shape the content of this first meeting, and we're going to be summarizing what we learned from those surveys here in the meeting. Similarly, we're going to be taking these live meeting polls and surveys afterward and hopefully feeding all of those into subsequent meetings. So it's really meant to try to create some interaction between what the public is saying and thinking and worried about and making sure that gets all fed into this process. There's also going to be email newsletters that are going to have updates. You can sign up using this QR code or going to the Data Council website that you see the URL here at the bottom. And there'll also be opportunities to engage through the Public Utilities Commission process. And those will have their own opportunities for engagement. Okay, I want to turn now to some introductions. So we're very excited to have most of you, I think, were able to make it here today. We know a few people were not able to make it, and that there are, for example, Carrie Gilbert is sitting in for Phil Bartlett for the PUC. So we have at least some alternates here. We know you all bring different perspective and expertise, and that's why you were selected to be on this council. So we want to start us off. Because time is limited, we're going to ask you to try to keep your introduction under 1 minute. or at least within about a minute. I think we have a little bit of time. So if we go a little bit over, that's okay. But we're going to just try to keep them as brief as possible. And what we'd like you to do is to tell us your name, your affiliation, and the question we did share with you in advance to think through, which is what is one challenge that you are excited to explore about this within the process of this council during this process. And so let me turn first to our co-chairs, Selena and Melanie, to get us started. Yeah, we'll drop the slide so we can look at each other's faces as we speak. So Selena, let me hand this back to you to get us started.
Great, thank you. And I'll just quickly start by noting that the council members were, just want to share how that they were identified. So the council members were primarily identified in the executive order in terms of the types of interests. And Commissioner Melanie Loism and I worked together to ensure that there were different perspectives and expertise represented on the council. And we also recognize, obviously, that we'll need input and expertise from many others beyond the council, but very encouraged to have all of you here today. And so just to kick it off in terms of the challenge that I'm particularly interested in, I'm excited to gain a shared understanding of these complex issues and really zeroing in on Maine specific approaches to take lessons learned from other places and share out, I think, our unique circumstances and needs of how we can move forward in Maine responsibly.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Melanie Loism. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection. I'm also the co-chair of the Maine Climate Council. I serve on the board of directors of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and I'm on the Development Ready Advisory Committee, which interestingly, all of these groups have an interest in data center development. I really appreciate all of you accepting our invitation to participate in this council. I know it's tough to commit more of your time, particularly when the weather starts to get nice like it is today. But I think that you all recognize how important it is to Maine citizens to address the challenges and opportunities that Governor Mills identified in her executive order. The challenge that I'm excited to explore during this process is to understand what environmental impacts are unique to data centers. I tend to focus primarily on environmental things. I can't help it. And I'm really interested to compare data center impacts to other types of development that we already have here in Maine, like medical complexes, industrial parks, and housing subdivisions, and to talk about whether and to what extent data centers should be treated differently than those other types of development. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Melanie. So I'm just going to go through our council members in the order they were on this slide and invite you to speak. So Michael Guy, if you would like to jump right in.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Mike Du, Department of Development. I'm the commissioner of the department there. I'd love for us to find out, are there ideal locations in Maine suitable for data center and development? What would those characters actually consist of? And are there locations here in Maine? Thank you. And then also, thank you for everybody here taking your time on this really important issue.
Thanks, Michael. Sarah, turning to you.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all today. My name is Sarah Curran. I am Director of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. I also co-chair the Maine Climate Council with Melanie, and our office supported the work of the AI task force that Selena was mentioning earlier. The challenge that I am excited to explore is how the state of Maine can partner with Maine communities so that the process for data center development is coordinated, transparent, and consistent across levels of Maine government.
Great, thank you. And Carrie Gilbert on behalf of the PUC.
Hi, yeah, I'm Carrie Gilbert. I'm one of the commissioners at the PUC, and I'm filling in for Chair Bartlett, who couldn't be here today. And so it was mentioned already that we've opened a docket at the PUC, which is going to be focused on how to protect electric, water, and gas ratepayers from the impact of data centers and sort of get a sense of what the current activity for data centers is in Maine. And I think the thing I'm most excited about this process is the ability to learn from stakeholders in areas beyond what normally comes before us in the PUC. I mean, you all represent sort of a wider array of interests. So I'm hoping through that we can understand a sort of a wider universe of benefits and costs of data centers and think about how to, maximize the benefits and minimize the costs. And I guess I have one other challenge I'd like to explore, which is a little bit more energy specific, but that is that at the PUC we don't regulate supply, and a lot of the news you hear about PJM and the challenges they're having with data centers is around the supply side and the market impacts of data centers. So I'd love to see us think about how we could have data centers address that supply issue if they come to Maine. So there's lots of different ways to think about that, but those are sort of initial thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Carrie. Heather Sanborn.
Thanks. Heather Sanborn from the Office of the Public Advocate. I am really glad to be participating in this. I think this is a situation where, because Maine is actually not out ahead, one of the rare places where we are not doing our Dirigo thing, we get to learn from the lessons of what other states have experienced. My challenge that I'm excited to explore is how when data centers do come to Maine, we can harness them to actually make our water, gas, and electric rates more affordable for our residents rather than less so. And I think there's a lot of lessons from other states that we can figure out in order to make sure we're extracting that value for ratepayers from the additional use of electricity, water, and gas. I mean,
Great, thank you. Andrew Butcher.
Hi, good morning, friends. I'm Andrew Butcher. I serve as president for the Maine Connectivity Authority. MCA, as you know, is a quasi-governmental entity charged with expanding our connectivity infrastructure. I was glad to be able to participate with and learn from members in the AI task force. For our work in the connectivity space, we are investing a significant amount of capital into our connectivity infrastructure, which has implications far into the future. And so just as there's a lot to learn and understand regarding how data centers in Maine fit into the connectivity landscape. So I'm excited to be learning with and working with this council as we both understand more and really lean into the function of interagency cross-sector collaboration.
Great, thank you. Emily Cole Prescott.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Cole Prescott. I'm the Deputy City Administrator for the City of Saco. Really happy to be working with you all on this and representing the municipal seat for Maine Municipal. I'm looking forward to really diving into positive and negative interconnected considerations of large data centers for municipalities, really from a holistic perspective. We all know that one decision made in municipality has multiple impacts on another part of the municipality and potentially surrounding communities. So I'm really looking forward to diving into that with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Craig Nail.
Good morning, Craig Nail from Central Maine Power Company. I apologize for being late, but I'm excited to be here. And CMP, of course, is the T&D utility serving 650-ish thousand customers in the central and southern parts of the state. Not involved in the supply portion of the bill, but I think from our perspective, I think the challenge that we're really looking to explore here is just the number of issues that are involved in this topic is so many. I mean, we've heard about water and supply and interconnection already from a few people. So just taking the time to untangle those and approach them very objectively and establish the facts is, I think, going to be a huge benefit of this process. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Erica Young.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Erica Young. I'm the president of Versant Power. We're the transmission and distribution utility for Northern Maine, serving about 165,000 customers. The thing I'm most excited to explore during this session is how we can meet the state's infrastructure needs for today and tomorrow. And similar to some of the other comments echoed, the how costs are being appropriately assigned to customers. That's something that's very important to us. Similar to Central Maine Power, we don't generate or supply the electricity. And so looking at the broad impacts of data centers and where does the electricity come from, how's it generated, and the environmental impacts, the community engagement, and economic development and opportunities that are sort of all wrapped up into these issues is really important. And I'm grateful that we have an opportunity to invest this time collectively in advance of things coming at us so quickly, where we can make decisions in a deliberate and considerate way that takes into account many different perspectives.
Thank you. Amy Turner.
Good morning. I'm Amy Turner. I'm the CEO of Fox Islands Electric and Fox Islands Wind, also representing the consumer-owned utilities through the state of Maine. I think when we are talking about this with consumer-owned utilities, one of the key challenges that comes up that I'm representing on this board today and being part of the investigation into this issue is coming to an adaptable framework that allows us to respond to the unique communities that we serve because of the number of issues and just with siting and resource allocation that come with this issue, being able to really look at it objectively, as Craig said, that we can look at it objectively and come up with a framework that doesn't prohibit or I think get out in front of some of the responding to the communities that we serve. We want to be highly flexible, highly responsive. We want a framework that allows us to objectively deal with these issues on a whole large scale basis, while also being able to be highly responsible to the communities that we serve.
Great, thanks. Jack Shapiro.
Good morning, everybody. First, it's just we have just such a wealth of experience and breadth on here. I'm getting to go last after many things have already been mentioned. But we talked about some of the issues that are, I think, important to the environmental community and the folks working on climate and clean energy policy. And those are many of those have already been said. Will these impact electricity rates? What are the air and water quality and use impacts? Will these high energy users impact our climate and emissions goals? And do we need standards for community engagement and transparency? But also, as was mentioned, there may be some benefits to these kinds of developments if we do it right. So I think what I'm interested in exploring, and I think we're well positioned to as a group, is what do data center developments look like that we could support or even be excited about? And what are the frameworks that we need to put in place to make sure that that's what we get?
And Jack, just to say your affiliation quickly.
Yes, sorry. I'm the Climate and Clean Energy Director with the Natural Resources Council of Maine.
Thanks, Jack. Nick Paquette.
Yes, good morning. My name is Nick Paquette. I'm business manager of IBW 1253. That is construction electricians. We've been around since 1946. We have over 330 members in the greater Maine area. And not only that, we live in Maine, right? So we work in the construction industry, and we raise our families here in the state. So with hearing some of the great comments already, what I'm looking to do here is to learn more from everybody and the concerns that everybody has. We talk about the data centers within our local union meetings and what that brings, pros and cons, and here to learn more. Obviously, we see the aspects of jobs, and we've seen a decline in that industry as a whole in the industrial market, paper mill closures. So at data centers, we we can look at things a little bit differently from my point of view anyways. It's just, to me, it's cleaner than being in a paper mill. Still like paper mills, don't get me wrong. But there's a lack of that infrastructure and that business. Those businesses have left Maine, and that affects taxpayers too, which are ratepayers. So it's interesting to me as this unfolds and this opportunity comes to Maine, realizing right now that the rates in Maine isn't necessarily what's attracting them here. And it's already in their portfolio, if you will, of profit and loss. It's not because of the cheap electrical rates here in Maine currently, because we don't have them. So through this process, I'm hoping to understand more on the ratepayer issue, more on that demand, as well as I'm currently sitting in a meeting with the New England IBEW Energy Summit, which has some of representatives from Avangrid, Versant, CMP, and we talked about data centers and other issues as well last night. So really feel like I'm getting a good kickstart of that education. And I'm hoping at the end that there's an opportunity to bring businesses back into Maine because, we need them for our communities. And I think that's very important and underlooked. And being Mainers, we've always had a good tie into the environment. So I think at the end of the day, we can look at these projects, hopefully, and bring something back that is good, finally, for the state, that does good for the local communities. And I think that's important. And I think it's important that we hear from local communities as well. I think I pretty much tied up that minute.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Giovanna Guidoboni.
Hi, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I am Giovanna Guidoboni. I am from the University of Maine, where I serve as Dean of the Maine College of Engineering and Computing, and I serve also as Interim Vice President for Research. And I am appointed as faculty, as professor in electrical and computer engineering. So a challenge that I am excited to explore with the council and with the community is how can we develop a sustainable paradigm where data centers are actually active contributors to the energy grid rather than just passive consumers. Several of the council members mentioned lessons learned across the United States, and I would like to expand it to lessons learned also from across the globe, where some countries, for example, have generated heat from data centers that then have warmed the homes, reducing also CO2 emissions. Now, the question that I am very interested in is how would such a paradigm look like in Maine and for Maine? And I am very happy and honored to be able to contribute to the group with also kind of a liaison to the many internationally renowned scholars that we have across the state, whose expertise covers, for example, resiliency and reliability of the grid, or designing dynamic loads for energy grids. And also, so I'm looking forward to collaborate with all of you to develop recommendations that really maximize grid reliability and resilience while also safeguarding the environment and the people in Maine.
Thank you. Brendan Arbuckle.
Hey, good. Thank you. It's good to see everybody and meet you all. Brendan Arbuckle, the CIO of the Jackson Laboratory, headquartered in Bar Harbor, Maine, a nonprofit research-focused institute. A lot of similar interests from Giovanna. But we are heavy compute users, but all of that is focused on improving human health, Alzheimer's, oncology. Many of you may be familiar with the Maine Cancer Genomics Institute out of Augusta, which is about bringing better cancer services to rural patients. And so we have a deeply rooted and invested interest in Maine, being headquartered there, and most of our employees are there. And so, what's really important and exciting for me is I think Maine's done something very surprising to the rest of the nation in putting a stake in the ground and saying we're going to take a pause and we're going to think through the right way to do this, as opposed to some of the other states where they've rushed ahead. And if you go to Virginia or some other states with a huge number of data centers, the problems already exist, and now it's very difficult to unwind those. And so I think there's a unique opportunity for us to creatively thread the needle here and come up with an answer that's a win-win for all the concerns. And so I'm super excited to work with the group to achieve that. I think it's possible. As a matter of fact, I'm confident it's possible. There are lots of great ideas and opportunities. And I do think that allowing things to constructively, responsibly move forward is important. It's important for Maine. It's also important for the Jackson Laboratory. 2 megawatts is the size of our private data center, to put this in perspective. And so, we have a need to apply these tools to some of the research, which is all about making people's lives longer and better. So great to meet you all.
Great. And last but not least, Bill Burney.
Yes, good morning. Bill Burney, Vice President, Penobscot General Contractors, also on the executive board for AGC Maine Associated General Contractors. 30-year career in industry and energy, predominantly started in Maine, pulp and paper, all of our industries around the state. The last 8 years on a more global level, currently acting as project executive on a 1,500 megawatt data center in Texas, and also 12 data center developments with economic development groups in Canada and US and other states. So I'm looking forward to talking about the opportunity of how we can find a win-win in the state of Maine and take some of the lessons from the other Canadian provinces and states that I'm working with and find a balance that works for Maine for some of our shuttered industrial brownfield sites and find opportunities for jobs in the construction and then beyond the technical positions and maintenance positions that come with these data centers.
Great. I want to thank and welcome again and thank all of our council members. I think as everyone heard, there is a vast wealth of expertise among you, very diverse interests across the different issues that touch this topic, energy, jobs, community benefits, climate goals, sustainability. And I heard very strongly come through a common theme of trying to find good outcomes for the state, win-wins, identify and how to identify and really hold up ways that that data centers might really benefit our communities and our state, and mitigate harms, but not just mitigate harms, right? Really find positives that this can be bringing. So you all, this is going to be, I think, a very exciting journey to travel through, fast and furious for all of us. There's going to have to be prioritizing that we do along the way on how we focus on these issues. I think there's a lot of confidence that this group is the right group of people, in combination with all of the public input that will be coming to help support all of the points of view that you all come and bring. I wonder, before we turn back to just if we have some staff members, additional staff members that might want to introduce themselves, that haven't gotten a chance to do that. Afton, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, my name is Afton Vigu and I'm the communications manager for the Maine Department of Energy Resources.
Great. David?
Hello, everyone. I'm David Medor. I am Deputy Commissioner and Communications Director for the Department of Environmental Protection.
Great, thanks. Sabrina?
Thanks, Stacy. Good morning, everyone. Sabrina Jondra. I'm the Economic Development Coordinator for the Department of Energy Resources.
Great. And Tagwango?
Good morning. My name is Tagwango. I manage the Economy and Innovation Division at the Department of Energy Resources.
Great. Is there anyone I missed? Okay. Great. So with that, let me turn this back to you, Selena, to give us the overview of what we are all doing here.
Great. If you could go to the next slide, please. As you know, we are going to come back to this executive order throughout this process. It sets the guideposts of the work that we are doing and grounds the directives set forth for us. And so we will be focusing on these three themes throughout. If you can go to the next slide. The executive order also lays out the deliverables, and that will include key findings and analysis, stakeholder and agency input. We'll discuss policy options and focus on actionable recommendations that we can put forward and a final report to the legislature and the governor by January 29th, 2027. Next slide, please. So how we are going to go about that is we are really breaking the work into three groups, focus on topics, although as we will discuss later today, there are a lot of components of each of these buckets, and there are intersecting elements of them that will all need to be considered. So these are the key topics that we will cover throughout our time together. We are also open to adding additional content or topics if there are things that we haven't yet brought up that need to be considered as we are developing this report and recommendations. And so I'll just put that out there as a note to you all. And we are thinking about this in terms of really focusing on understanding the safeguards that are in place. And that is across in terms of environmental laws and regulations, as well as on the energy side. Getting into what are those risks and opportunities, where have we learned lessons from elsewhere around the US and beyond, and what can we glean in terms of what best practices and opportunities we may want to consider. And then we'll look at how we can, what policy options there are, what can be done in existing regulations, what changes might need to be made at either the regulatory or statutory level, and then put forward draft recommendations. Throughout all of this work, we want to make sure that there are opportunities to get informed and public input throughout, and understanding we're going to have a variety of ways that we can do that. And we'll share more about that as we go through this meeting. And we certainly will have opportunities for comments on the drafts as well. And so if you go to the next slide, please. As a first step, we are setting approximately monthly meetings of council members. These are virtual meetings. They're all in the morning, except for the next one, which is June 23rd in the afternoon. And we will put forward information in advance of these meetings to make sure it's clear what the agenda is and the topics. But this will be an opportunity for us to bring together outside experts, create a shared understanding of the content and what we really need to understand together. We'll need to, as has been mentioned, prioritize our time in terms of what topics we focus on and where we really need to invest our energy. We also are open to adding additional meetings, or workshops, or things that may be needed to delve into topics if this is not sufficient. So this is our first step here. All of our meetings will be open to the public. At this point, they're all held virtually. Agendas, meeting recordings, materials, and meeting summaries will all be available on our website as well. And so with that, I'll turn it back to CBI.
Great. So let me pick it up here, and I think I'll drop the slides for a second. Counselors, first, a round of questions. Any questions you have about how we're going to be working or what Selena just put out there, the way we're going to sequence the conversations, any quick thoughts about that? And rest assured, we're going to do a whole nother set of this section of this meeting about the topics themselves. So we don't need to get into that substance, but just curious about the flow of it, how it's going to work, suggestions you have there, questions you have for your co-chairs. Any doubts about how this is going to go forward? Or any friendly amendments or suggestions? Andrew?
David, I do have just a quick question, and it was referenced in some of the commissioner's overview. There's a lot of activity happening through a federal policy landscape. And over the next couple months, it's quite possible that this process will be informed by and impacted by various policies or executive orders from a federal landscape perspective. I'm just wondering if we have a sense of and or a plan for how we'll be tracking and informing council discussion and process with any of the federal activities.
Love the question. Selena, do you want to jump on that?
Sure. And Melanie, feel free to chime in as well if you have thoughts. You're absolutely right that we anticipate that there will be action at some point related to federal activity, whether it be through the executive process or the legislative process. And I think certainly the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is interested in looking at potential activity related to data centers. And I also note that in terms of an energy perspective, there is the role of ISO New England from a regional perspective beyond the state. And so we want to make sure that we're providing information about not only Maine, but also the broader topics that are going on. And so we can plan on making sure that we're highlighting those throughout the process if there are substantial changes. And then I think part of the conversation that we want to be having is what are the elements that we can control and what are the ones that we cannot, and kind of stack our recommendations and considerations that way. So you're absolutely right that we are not, some of these things will be influenced outside of Maine as well.
Great. Thanks. Thanks for the question, Andrew. Erica?
Maybe just to build a little bit on that, I think it would be helpful to make sure we're independently in some way looking at the environmental and other impacts for generation versus data centers themselves. I think it was alluded to by Bill. He's working with some entities in Canada, and then we're just having this federal question. But it also would be possible that the generation could be located in Quebec or New Brunswick. And so then if we're looking at more of the hosting of the data center in Maine and what those impacts are, separated from hosting also the generation source, it's just another angle to make sure we look at those things separately.
Thanks, Erica. Right. And I think it's part of, I think what Craig or somebody else said, like teasing these different pieces apart so we actually know what we're talking about, and that allows us to be more nuanced. Okay.
Exactly. And just maybe drilling a little bit further on the nuance for data center. I think it was Brendan who talked about it, very small load data centers that they have, and sort of differentiating the large AI data centers from more like cloud storage and other data centers. The impacts of those are quite different. And when we get into the discussions around it, just making sure everybody's understanding which types of data center we're talking about and which impacts.
Excellent. Yeah. And Melanie's going to say in just a second a word about the definitions that exist today and whether they're going to be sufficient or insufficient for the process you're going to go through. Okay. Other reflections like that, other sort of about our process and how to make sure we're successful in this? Other reflections or questions? So one thing that Stacy and I thought would be helpful, just sort of like get all of our brains going, and I think we had given this to you in advance, so hopefully it's not coming too out of the cold. But we'd like everyone in the chat, and when you do the chat, can you make sure you chat to everyone, not just hosts and panelists, but chat to everyone? That makes sure that folks in the public can see it too. But if you chat to everyone, to finish this sentence, this process will be successful if right? How would you finish that sentence? Thanks, RT. RT put it in the chat for us. Again, chat everyone, not just panelists and hosts. This process will be successful if. So let's just take a moment and think and go ahead and drop a response in the chat. I'm interested to see what people say.
Sorry, I need technical assistance. I can't figure out how to chat to everyone. It's not an option.
Yeah,
okay.
it's not an option.
Really? Okay. Well, you all can chat to hosts and panelists?
I think there was a setting issue. I just changed it.
Oh,
Let's try it one more time. Do you all see that now that you can chat to everyone?
Yes, I can now. Thanks.
That was our bad. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Melanie. I'm reading along. Just I hope the rest of you are also reading along here as people drop things in the chat. Thank you all for doing that. So if you're doing the reading like I'm doing right now, um, you're probably seeing some themes emerge. So just note those themes, and let's talk about them in just 1 second before we move on to the next section.
David, I thought I'd just note, I know there are some attendees have been raising their hands. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to call on attendees at this time. We will have a chance to weigh in via our live poll later. So just
Yeah.
you know.
Hang in there, folks. We're going to do a little bit of testing for everyone after we talk about the topics. I'm just going to forward, some of you did just to host some panelists, so I'm just going to forward those on to everyone. All right, so I'm curious if someone else besides me had to name some of the core themes coming out of what's in the chat, who would venture to do like at least a theme or two it's pretty clear? Who wants to venture forward on that?
I would say the clear theme is there's needs to be a balanced approach.
Right. A sort of balanced, open-minded, safeguarding the environment, safeguarding ratepayers, opportunities like the where and the how this could make sense for Maine. Something like that. Yeah. Are there other themes that are very clearly emerging from what you all just wrote in the chat, Carrie?
I think a sort of a better understanding of some of the issues, making sure, there's data centers are all over the place. Like it seems like people want to just understand what the real issues actually are, how they affect Maine, and what we can do about it.
Yeah. I've referred to that as our sort of shared learning journey here. Like
Yeah.
we have some learning to do, all of us. And by the way, let's bring everyone along with us who wants to join us on this journey. Jack?
One other thing I'm picking up is that the having the structure and policy framework here is helpful and can actually like support, both folks that have, support a comfort level for folks who have concerns about impacts, but also reduce the like temperature around the economic development issues so that there's a real mutual benefit to sort of getting that structure in place and coming to understanding around what these issues are and what the solutions might be.
Right. And Jack, when you're saying that, it's also important, therefore, that as we're going forward and looking at other states and best practice, that we understand the current regulatory framework as well. So we know if there's like what is missing in the current regulatory framework. Is that fair?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Other things that are jumping out. I haven't read the last three, sorry. Anything else that people want to shout out? Like, oh yeah.
Sorry, I already went, but I also think like the community impacts, thinking about communities. I heard that when people were talking, but I've also seen it in some of the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Doing this from a community level, like how does it feel as a community to do this? What resources do communities need to navigate this? How is this potentially beneficial for communities? And doing that community level analysis. Yeah. Giovanna?
I think that another theme is about the process itself, to be, you already said, open-minded, but also transparent, evidence-based, objective, with honest discussions that bring in both the council and the community, which I think this meeting is, of course, a step in that direction. And I think that the theme is to continue to have it basically through the whole process.
Yeah, I definitely see that too. Andrew?
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to highlight that, this process and the outcomes of this council inform many associated and related processes and planning. And so I put a link into the chat of the Maine Connectivity Authority's visioning and strategic planning process. We're actively taking public input. The function of data centers are a key part of our connectivity ecosystem. And so having this process inform related and associated plans is going to be really critical, and folks can do so right now.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Brendan?
Yeah, I just want to pile on a little bit with what Andrew said and what I said at the beginning. I think that Maine is in a leadership position. A lot of people are having this conversation ad hoc, not in an organized fashion. And I think this is the first example I've seen, and the Jackson Lab operates in a lot of states. This is the first example I've seen of any state having a cohesive, thoughtful, balanced group come together to have a dialogue and set the policies and pace and direction. So I do think that Maine has an opportunity to do a lot of good, not just for Maine, but to set a standard for what the rest of the nation can do. And I don't think that this group should lose sight of how unique this push is based on what I've seen elsewhere.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, we do have a chance to do that. Stacy and I have been poking around trying to figure out other examples too. Oregon is actually like a couple months into this, trying to do something similar, and all their stuff is online. So if folks are curious, Oregon could be one, Brandon, like the only one we found really that was trying to do something along the lines of what this group is doing. And they have a lot of interesting presentations online if folks are curious. Okay. Anything else folks want to name about this process and how this is going to be successful? Okay. Nick?
Yeah, I think just to touch on, some of the things I think we're already hearing. I know I put it in my chat. I could have went longer. I deleted it, but there's a lot of misinformation out there, just like with everything nowadays. And I think it's very difficult to cut through that. We're all here from different views, and we could tell through some of our introduction. But I think it's important that we have, transparency, honest communication, and try to cut through the bull, if you will, and really look at what this means for the state of Maine as a whole. I think that's what I wanted to touch on, and I'm eager to work with everybody. I just from some of the comments here, I already feel like there's a sincere group here, and I think that's important.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, it really feels like a good opportunity for that. And as we switch gears into the next section where we're talking about the topics, like to think, Nick, of like, wait, what are going to be credible sources of information as we get into these topics? Like, how do we put good information on the table for us and for everybody who's observing our process? So I really think that's an important piece of this. Okay, folks. Great. So we kind of have a vision of how this will be successful. We have a time constraint that's a little daunting, right? And everybody has busy lives, so it's not like you're going to drop everything and spend all of your time on this. So our balance is going to be, how do we do this in the way we've just said we want to do it, and do it in a timely fashion, and be efficient in the use of our time? So those are the kinds of puzzles we're going to have to work through as we go forward. All right, so that brings us to the next piece, which is the intro about the topical stuff that we're going to do. Melanie's got a couple slides that just sort of get us going and talk about that definitions piece. So Melanie, I'm going to go ahead and put the slides back up and turn it over to you. And then we'll talk a little bit specifically about those three big areas that Selena mentioned, the environmental areas, the energy areas, issues, and then the economic and community development issues. But Melanie, over to you to talk about definitions and other intro stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, David. All right, so now we're going to start to get into the meat of things. As David mentioned, and we talked about earlier, we've tried to break our topical areas that we think are relevant for discussion and based on the executive order into environment, energy, and the economy. But before we try to delve into sort of the nuts and bolts of those pieces, we need to understand what is our scope. And that's one of the things that I think came up already in our introductions and our conversation is understanding really what is a data center? Like, what are we actually talking about? As the Data Center Advisory Council, what is the scope of the thing that we are supposed to be trying to get our arms around here? So data centers were recently defined in Maine's tax law as a facility that primarily contains electronic equipment used for data processing, data storage, cloud computing, or similar computing infrastructure services. That all requires power and environmental control equipment to maintain the proper conditions for operation. This tax law definition does not include a facility or a portion of a facility that contains electronic equipment that is incidental to and used in support of a business whose primary business activity is not the performance of data processing, data storage, cloud computing, or similar computing infrastructure services. So this makes sense in a tax law context. It excludes businesses, let's say, that house their own servers to support their own applications. So for example, like Garmin in Yarmouth has servers, right, to support their research and development work, but their cloud connected services aren't being operated off of those servers in Yarmouth. They're operated elsewhere. And data centers are often discussed as if they're synonymous with artificial intelligence, but data centers are also used to manage data for governments, banking, healthcare, e-commerce, and social media. So does a definition that focuses on determining the primary nature of a business really fit our needs under the executive order to address concerns with energy load and environmental impacts? I think we, in our conversations, are going to be looking at things that are more related to the physical attributes of the facility. What is its source of energy? How much does it need? What is released to the environment as a result of its operations? And so as we're exploring the topics we've talked about, environment, energy, and the economy, I think we have the opportunity also to be thinking about if there are other metrics that would be helpful for us to define data centers more in the context of an energy and environmental policy. So we already have one of those metrics that was provided by the executive order. So the executive order refers to large data centers. But what does that even mean? Maine doesn't have a promulgated definition for large data centers. So as a starting point, what we're suggesting is that we'll focus on the same scale that was originally discussed with the legislature this year. That was 20 megawatts or more of electrical load. But again, as we're exploring the potential positive and negative impacts of these facilities, and if there are regulatory gaps to fill, I think we also want to be thinking, are there additional or different kinds of thresholds, like acreage, for example, that might also be appropriate? And so when we think about our task is to focus on large data centers, even though all data centers do have a definition in Maine law, in the context that we're operating in, we also have the opportunity to frame it up in a different way that meets the charge that is before us in the context that we need to be thinking about these with, already helpfully sort of that limit on scope to those that are really large in whatever sense we ultimately decide large is how we want to define it for those purposes. So David, next slide.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to start to go into the buckets, energy, environment, and the economy. And as we do that, we'd like you to think about some overarching questions. What information do you need to conduct the evaluation that we are tasked with? So as we schedule our next meetings, as we get prepared, or as we decide that we need additional meetings and subgroups and whatever, what's the information that we need to be providing you to help you to effectively participate in this conversation and provide good, solid recommendations? What practices and safeguards are already in place to address the concerns that are related to data centers? And are there gaps in those? Are those adequate safeguards? What can we learn from policies and practices in other jurisdictions, both nationally and internationally? And if we find that our policies and practices aren't adequate in some areas, what are the improvements that we can make? And how do we maximize the potential benefits of data centers to Maine? So again, these are the kind of questions. So we're going to go into more detail. We'll go into a lot more detail in future meetings, but keep these things in the back of your mind overall as we're having these conversations about how we take what information do we need, how do we use that to help frame up good recommendations to achieve all of the goals that we just discussed earlier in the meeting, which, by the way, is really cool to see all of us coming together for the first time, and how many of those outcomes we're looking for are so similar in terms of benefits to the people of Maine. So I love that we're coming here together with a shared goal. And then also appreciate you all being willing to do the really hard work of digging into the details, because we're going to have to get into some nitty gritty here, folks, before we're done with all of this in January. And with that, I'll turn it back over to CBI.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, so before I go to the next slide, I'll just note welcoming Maureen Terry, who's here. Maureen, thanks for joining. Commissioner Duguay had to drop off, and I understand you're going to step in for the commissioner, for Michael. So thanks for being with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so next up, as we're getting into the topical areas, Stacy already flagged this, but many of you in the call might know, hopefully all of you now know, that there was an open survey about the questions that this group should explore. So this got pushed out in the newsletters, and there was a lot of responses. We got over 100, 135 responses to that. This is not scientific. Like, nobody's suggesting this is a scientific survey. This is whoever decided to respond to the survey. But it's quite interesting to look at the responses. And so as we go into each topical area, the first slide we're going to do is a summary of what did people say in this topical area, and try to really capture those thoughts. By the way, very good representation across Maine, 86 towns, all but 2 counties. So folks in Waldo County, if you're listening, please send in some thoughts, because you weren't there. Piscataquis is the same. So Waldo and Piscataquis are a little low, but everybody else chimed in. So it's a good representation of Maine, which is nice to see. We're going to keep this particular survey open a week longer. If you're just listening to this or you're listening to the recording, jump in and we'll continue to do that. However, for each of these meetings, probably expect a survey from us ahead of that meeting with a question that's specifically relevant to the topics we'll be dealing with. So stay tuned, folks, if you're out there in the public, because we will be using this as a way to frame up the issues on each of these topical areas. Okay, so with that in mind, let's dive into the first piece, which we're going to do the environmental impacts as our first of our 3. This slide, what is this slide? This is a summary of all those survey responses. Again, not scientific, however, illustrative of what's on people's minds, particularly the ones who are more engaged in opening newsletters and looking at the information. Okay, so here we go. Let's look at this. And then I'm going to turn it over to Melanie to say, okay, based on this and everything that we know, this is going to be our focus. So this is just the survey responses. People are interested in water, like water supply, the impact on private wells, water quality, anything that could affect water or discharge, right? Those are important questions for folks. And not a surprise, it's just interesting to see that those really rose to the top. Next, noise, right? Noise and elements like noise, this term infrasound, and we'll talk about hopefully through this process, we can all get a good education of what that is and isn't. Right? How to manage noise from these facilities, right? Land use, right? What it means for land. Are we clearing land? What does it mean for habitat? If these are really massive, like what does that look like, right? So land use issues and habitat and impacts on land, right? What does this mean for climate and our greenhouse gas emissions? Melanie already mentioned this, right? Maine has goals about reductions of greenhouse gases and the Maine's emissions. What is that going to mean for that, right? And then this gets to the core as well. Do our existing permitting and regulatory structures, are they up to the task, right? Is there something missing because of the newness of this, or is this fundamentally, do we have the right pieces in place already? Okay. And finally, thinking ahead, decommissioning, remediation, this is all moving so quickly. What happens if all this becomes obsolete that quickly as well? And what happens in that decommissioning phase and when everything is done? Okay, and the liability around that. So that's the survey responses. Now, Melanie, back to you. What does all this mean for this group and how we're going to be organizing our conversations on these topics?
Thanks, David. All right. So as David just summarized, data center facilities involve a lot of activities and materials that can impact the environment. For anybody who's ever tried to get a permit to do anything in Maine that has an environmental impact, you already know that Maine has a robust and complex regulatory system. And I say that both in a positive and negative way because it is very complex for preventing and mitigating adverse environmental impacts from development. What you're seeing here listed on the slide is by no means a complete list of environmental considerations that could be related to data center facilities, nor of the laws, rules, and other safeguards that already apply to them. So for example, from what we just saw in the survey, questions about siting, lighting, and sound are all covered by the Site Location of Development Act. The Site Location of Development Act has a provision that says that large-scale developments have to have a harmonious fit with existing uses in Maine's environment and the surrounding community. There are so many nuances that we could dig so deep into just under site law. Natural Resources Protection Act protects wetlands. It addresses habitat impacts. Under the Clean Water Act, we regulate wastewater discharges. Under the Clean Air Act, there are restrictions for energy generation facilities related to emissions. So environmental impacts in Maine are regulated at all levels of government. There's federal, state, and local authorities related to those impacts. And then there are potentially multiple agencies involved at every one of those levels. So for example, at the federal level, for water quality and wetlands impacts, you're dealing with both the EPA and the Army Corps. Permitting decisions at every level of government include opportunities for public input. So opportunities for public comment on applications, there are public meetings, potentially public hearings. There's also opportunities to appeal those agencies' decisions. And so any singular decision that is made in regards to development of a data center isn't the only one that is needed in order for that development to go forward. Which permits and other approvals are required depends on where a facility is located and what equipment will be operated. No development, data centers or otherwise, are cookie cutter. They're not all the same. There's always some variable. Every single piece of property in the state of Maine has unique characteristics that contribute to which permits related to environmental impacts are going to be necessary at every one of those levels of government. So for example, if you were going to use an already developed site, that involves a whole lot fewer environmental impacts than if you're building on a greenfield. So that means that permitting is easier and it provides an incentive for developers to use sites like brownfield sites, where you have existing infrastructure, maybe already an engineered stormwater system, maybe already existing electrical services. Wetlands have already been filled, trees have already been cut, habitats already been impacted. That's different from when you're moving into a forested area and cutting things down and looking at filling wetlands, having stream impacts, wastewater discharges that hadn't been previously permitted. So the scope of what we're talking about when we look at potential impacts from data centers, we'll have to be thinking about it across that whole range of possibilities and looking at, are there gaps in the safeguards that we have now that we need to fill? But again, in this case, specific to data centers. What's different about a data center than the other types of development in Maine that also impact those same parcels that in many ways have a lot of those same kind of impacts? So this is what I would ask you all to think about as we prepare for a much deeper dive and crash course into environmental permitting and regulation in Maine. Is, do we really want to get into everything, every kind of development, or let's focus on the things that are specific to data centers that may be different and where we have an opportunity to address particularized concerns related to those? So I'll turn that over to David now, I think, to get a little bit of feedback on that.
Yeah. And so what we'd like to do is I'm going to leave this slide up right now. This slide obviously takes everyone's breath away a little bit, and the fact that Melanie is able to synthesize it is great. It is quite complex, right? And so our job right now is to provide a little bit of guidance around focus, honestly. And so we have a couple questions for you, and I'm happy to drop them in the chat unless RT beats me to it. But our questions fundamentally get to like, where do we really need to put our attention based on everything you all know right now? If we had a meeting or two focused on these environmental pieces, thanks, RT, these environmental pieces, like where do you really want to put attention? Both in terms of the areas of focus, like the impacts, but then also looking at that constellation of existing regulation and where there may be an opportunity to strengthen something specific to the data center impacts. So there's the questions in the chat. What's most important, right? Is there something we're missing here in this that is actually more important than what's on the page right now? And the final question is about, where are some good data sources and information sources that you think, or people, expertise that you'd want to see involved if we have a meeting or two about these issues? So let me pause for a second. Quick reaction. How are we doing here? What's most important? If you had to prioritize, where would you prioritize? Brendan?
Yeah, so I think there is a lot here. Thank you, Melanie. Something that's unique about data centers, obviously, we are categorizing and talking about them on an energy basis. And so most regulations don't define things in that fashion. They define square footage, they define water discharge or the temperature delta between the water and going in and going out. So the net thermal impact to a river, things of that nature. And I think there's a different way to slice through this for this group and to help us focus would be based on that particular angle of things. Is Maine going to recommend that there is no discharge? Is it going to be a closed loop, totally contained system with RO or however you perceive doing that in cooling towers? But really, there's energy discharge, and I think, is that going into the river? Is it going into the air? What's acceptable in either case? So I think thinking about that will help us narrow our focus a little bit in that space and understand what's the difference between a 2 megawatt and a 20 megawatt or a 40 megawatt installation and things of that nature. So I would just encourage people to think along those lines.
Great. And if I were just quickly follow up, Brendan, before I jump over to Emily, like, Brendan, are you saying it's, let's not get distracted about the amount, like the number, like the size of the energy need of the facility? Let's really focus on discharge and impact on the environment. Is that what you're saying? Or you're saying the focus on discharge as a way to understand, like, are we need to be worrying about a 20 megawatt versus 100 and, megawatt?
Carefully focus on energy discharge, right? I mean, yes, the processes are going to use use energy. I think, and I apologize, I'm probably going to not pronounce your name right, Dr. Giudibbani.
Guido Boni.
Guido Boni, thank you. Apologies. But she mentioned basically a combined heat and power sort of approach to things where you're reclaiming a lot of that. So perhaps if you design that well, 40 megawatt footprint might actually behave like a 20 or a 10 if it's well designed. And so I think the reason to frame it that way is it's helping consider making the absolute most efficient and effective, and it has cost value if it's done well. It's an incentive both for environmental purposes as well as for the owner because it's cheaper to operate in the long term if it's done well. So that's really what I was thinking about, not necessarily water discharge, but draw a box around the site and what's the overall energy loss at the site, perhaps.
Thanks, Brendan. Really interesting. Appreciate that thought. Emily?
I agree with where Brendan's going with that. I think it'd be helpful too to see some scenarios, maybe 3 scenarios of how differently designed data centers, large data centers are operating in different states. And then looking holistically at what is the discharge, the energy discharge that Brendan's mentioning, and also the loading on wastewater as well as water demands and energy demands for the communities.
Okay. Right. So if we can get some examples, like actual examples of how this works, the energy just discharge, the water discharge, the water use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the key things that you're looking at. Okay. Carrie? I'm just taking some notes, by the way, because I want to share them back so we know like where we land
Yeah,
on
I
this.
think I was thinking along the same lines that I don't really have the foggiest idea what the environmental impacts of, say, a 20 megawatt data center would be. So I think if we had some parameters around that, like citing, it might take up this much space in terms of acres, and it might use this much water, and just so we know, and then I don't know how that would compare to another development either. I don't know if it's good or bad because it's not, really my area of expertise, but I think just some facts about what we might expect the impact of data centers to be on all of these various categories would be helpful.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks. I like how we continue to build off of collective comments. So the process is working. One thing, and I know we're only talking really from a environmental lens, and we'll talk energy in a little while. I think what would also be helpful in this context is a priority around sequencing of the multiple layers of permitting, and I realize that may be an impossible thing to read out, but useful to get a sense of for any potential development if they haven't started a siting permitting process or a necessary water permitting process with the associated agency, then it's not really real. And so how can we understand the sequencing and factor that into how we are tracking and coordinating around any particular project or opportunity?
Interesting. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah. Jack, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these are important, but I'll just share a few that have come up in discussions with some of the other folks in the environmental community. I think the water withdrawal and discharge is a big one, including and this kind of goes to cooling fluids and refrigerants, I believe, but I'd love to better understand it, which is the issues around PFAS. Um, the I think there's a sort of a combined issue around air, air emissions and backup power and greenhouse gases as well that we could probably pull apart. I know we've heard of data center developments in other parts of the country where that are grid connected but have like rows of diesel generators for backup, and that obviously has like local air emissions and sound and um, um, other kinds of issues there. And then I think the other one I would mention would be the sort of citing brownfields issues, and it goes a little bit into permitting and this sort of scenario stuff that's been talked about. Because I believe site law is applicable to developments over 20 acres. And is that the same as a 20 megawatt data center? I don't know. So like when do we have the right uh sort of permitting, framework sort of come into effect relative to the things that and just making sure that we're syncing those up.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Giovanna?
I would just like to add a note with respect to many things that were already said about, for example, the total energy produced and released and reutilized, as well as Jack just mentioned about the backup generation and so on. In our considerations that link energy and environmental impacts, I think it would be important to include the type of energy too, like whether it is renewable resource or renewable energy or not. Again, bringing in or dissecting, in a sense, examples that are already in place across the globe with the goal of understanding what works, what doesn't, what is it that could be considered, but kind of information gathering and analysis.
Great. Really helpful. Excellent. Brendan, you're putting something in the chat here about the sort of size.
Yeah, I want to give people some reference points. There's a wide range because if they're multi-story, obviously they changes the square footage and the acreage, but there's a reasonable range for people to consider.
Great. So folks, this is a practical thing, but when you drop something in the chat, can you make sure you send it to everyone? You'll see I'll just repost that to everyone just so that folks behind this wall can see as well. Great. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, David. I just wanted to first thank Melanie for that overview. That was really helpful. And I appreciate that these are very complicated standards already in place. And so it's good to have that overview. I want to second the suggestions for sort of examples and scenarios. And in particular, I think for me, understanding how data center development is different from other types of development would be really helpful. And then the last thing I'd add is, and Emily might be able to speak more to this, but I think really understanding how the local land use planning and ordinances intersect with the state processes would be really helpful for me as well. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Emily?
Just to follow up, I'd be happy to do that, but it's probably best to kind of do it offline and funnel the information through them.
Okay. Right. It's a big conversation. I think you're talking about how local land use intersects on this?
Yes.
Emily? Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we talk about economic impacts, I think we're going to try to weave in also some of that community development issues and community control and how community land use things affects all this. So Emily, I think we'll be turning to you for help in navigating that when we get there.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So do you want me to show back what I've been typing up? It's a little messy, but I'm doing my best here. And I think one of the things is we want to make sure we're really capturing, so we're not spending a lot of time wheel spinning. And then, let's see if we can get this tight in terms of the feedback. So hang on one second. Let me just share a screen that I have going on here. And let's see if we get this. And I have a fairly thick skin, so if you think these are like terrible notes, let's fix them. But on these issues, the feedback that I'm hearing you all say is there's an important piece of looking at scenarios and looking how this is working in other states. And then while you're doing that, putting some parameters around the environmental issues that are most relevant and what makes data centers different than other development. Okay. And then specifically, what you've mentioned is the energy discharge piece is important in designing that footprint well. Wastewater discharge, of course, and water use. These are like top. Also, air emissions, particularly because of the use of backup power and how that could be different. And this is air emissions for local as well as carbon greenhouse gas emissions. Related to that is type of energy source, land use issues. Both does our current permit framework work well for this, and local land use issues, and then issues around PFAS, which got put in there. And then there's this comment from Andrew of like, hey, if we can understand the sort of flow of permitting and the sequence of permitting, that helps all of us make sense of how this would work and keep track of how a project might be moving forward or not. Okay, so that's what I wrote. Please make it better. Is this the feedback you want to give to the team as we prepare the next meeting on this issue? Carrie?
The one question I have is in the scenarios, if there should be a 20 megawatt data center and then one of the hyperscaler data centers, because I'm just thinking ahead to the energy side. I know that we would think about those two very different in their impact on the grid. And I also think that they might have differences in sort of utility to the state. Like my understanding is hyperscalers are serving a much broader purpose, whereas the smaller ones might be more serving like a medical need, like a local need. But I don't really know that yet. But I'm just wondering if and then Brendan's comments sort of show our 20 megawatt as being a different type of data center than the hyperscaler. So I just wondered if we want to, when we're thinking about scenarios, have two there instead of one for size.
Yeah. And I think, Carrie, for sure, we definitely should look at those differences of size, both from an impact standpoint and sort of overall how we're understanding the impacts that they have.
Thanks.
Jack?
Yeah, just two things real quick. One, as we talk about wastewater discharge, just making sure that we're inclusive of both the sort of like temperature piece, but also like the what's in the discharge or potentially in the discharge. And that obviously brings into like, as someone mentioned, like every development's different, right? Their choices for cooling technology is all going to be different. But that was one thing. And then the other was I'm reminded that there is this proposal for this underwater data center in Eastport. And so this is all about sort of land-based. And so I guess just making sure that we're not like forgetting about that, even though, who knows what will happen with that project or others, but I guess we should probably think about it.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Jack. And again, feel free, folks, to like literally say you got this wrong on the page. I adapt it to do something else. But Bill? Pesky mute button.
There we go. Sorry about that. I had two things. One is also the use of the data center we should take into consideration. As an example, highly for AI-driven R&D facilities. They're very cyclical in their energy demand, which has impacts on the utility and the grid if they're tied to the grid. And then second comment is around the renewable piece. One of the things that I'm working on is in forested regions across North America that have an abundance of biomass and looking to feed data with biomass and adding that into the renewable piece of what we're going to be discussing, because that's also an economic balance for the state because we're abundance of forest.
Got it. Right. Okay. All right. I think we need to pivot to the next topic so we get through all three of them in the time we have. This feels like a good list. Feel free to reach out if you think this isn't a good list. Melanie, is there anything here where you're like, I don't get what the feedback is? Are you feeling good about this?
Nope, that's all makes a ton of sense. And there are so many additional details in my head related to all of these. So for sure. Yep. Totally on it. It all
I can
makes a lot of
only
sense.
imagine. Okay, so let's go forward. And I think Stacy, you're going to take the next one, right? And so I'll
Yes.
put the screen up
Great.
with the survey responses.
Great. So, just as we did for the environmental, and I know we've already dipped into some of the energy topics already, but we're going to start with a summary of what we heard in the survey. We'll turn to Selena to hear some overview of core themes, and then we'll come back to council discussion. Okay, so survey responses focused around a couple of key topics. One was the cost allocations for upgrading the grid and for the anticipated additional energy that's going to be necessary for data centers, figure out who's going to pay for those and how to make sure that this cost does not get borne by the communities or the taxpayers. Related to this is the electricity rate impacts to make sure that the rates for households and small businesses don't go up, as well as thinking about financial liability and grid priority during emergencies, and knowing some of the things we talked about earlier about the secondary sources and the impacts of those. Third is this topic about where the energy comes from. I think you guys have already started talking about that, but the possibility of requiring or prioritizing renewable energy, making sure that the sources of energy are well aligned with the state's goals. And then there were some questions about what happens in the interim and also how this fits with additional processes that are happening now. We heard about that a little already at the beginning. So those were some of the key themes that we heard in the survey questions that the public offered. So let me turn this now over to Selena. And Selena, you can talk about how you all have started thinking about these.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. So I think we've already heard that there is some distinction around in terms of what we're talking about in terms of large data centers, the size of them, the number of them, the locations, and whether or not they're connected to the grid. And so this all connects to the energy questions as a whole. What we do know is that large data centers can have a significant impact on energy and power. There's power quality elements as well that need to be considered. And in New England, obviously, as we previously discussed, there has not been substantial new development, but it is something that ISO New England is looking at in terms of the forecast. What do we anticipate in terms of large data centers in the region? So that is something that we'll be taking a look at. One thing that I think is important to note is that electricity demand is already projected to increase in Maine and New England, and this is given because of the transition to cleaner energy sources and electrification. And this requires consideration of new energy supply, as well as considerations of how the grid can handle this increase in different load that we're seeing as we electrify the grid. I will just want to take a step back to say that every 2 years, the Department of Energy Resources puts forward an energy plan that holistically looks at how to meet our long-term energy needs, thinking about energy supply, grid infrastructure considerations, and how to more efficiently operate the grid in our planning processes. And through that work, we focus on energy affordability, reliability, and reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And this includes reducing our dependence on home heating and as well as achieving our state electricity laws, including 100% clean energy by 2040. And so that work is underway now in terms of the development of our energy plan. And so we already know the energy demand is increasing. Right now, we don't anticipate substantial development from data centers, but it's something we want to consider thinking about it more holistically. And a couple of things I'll say about increasing energy supply and increasing energy uses in the state. As you think about more people and greater use of the existing infrastructure, there can be cost benefits from having more people and more use of the electricity grid to lower the overall cost of the infrastructure. And so while there can be costs associated with increased load and increased needs for infrastructure, there can be financial benefits as well. We have a number of rules already in place that on the right-hand side, you can see some of the entities that I've previously mentioned, and that there are certain responsibilities and regulatory roles that each entity has that would be part of the planning process that we want to consider in thinking about where Maine has an ability to influence the process and what safeguards are already in place. I will note that in the executive order, in addition to the work of the council, the executive order also directed the Department of Energy Resources to work with the Maine Public Utilities Commission to do a few things. One is to identify and implement strategies in the near term to protect ratepayers from new and increased energy costs, and then also take a look at energy supply costs and transmission and distribution costs and impacts to reliability. And so, as was previously mentioned, the Public Utilities Commission has opened a docket number 2026-00142, in case people want to find that they are early in the days in terms of starting that process, but that will be a public docket where they'll take a look at what are the existing rules in place, what information is available around data centers that are how the process is regarding interconnecting data centers now, and then also it'll be a tool for us to think about what strategies we may want to think about in the future. On the energy supply side, obviously there's a lot of interest in terms of what will be required for data centers. I think it is important to talk about whether they'll be whether data centers will be grid connected, not grid connected, or what will be utilized for backup energy generation as well. And then in the state more broadly, we have been thinking about how to better utilize our existing grid through whether it's demand management or managing load more effectively to reduce the peak demand, so that highest use of energy, which is what the costs are really driving when you think about building the grid out. And so when we think about how to reduce the peak demand, there are various tools that can be utilized to do so. When thinking about bringing in data centers, are there ways that we can think about benefits to the grid in terms of the operations? So that's another area that we'll want to take a look at. And then I noted that the conversation around environment intersects with energy in a lot of ways. And when we get to the economic and community engagement, you'll see the theme that there are intersecting conversations here. So I think we'll want to focus on how to bucket those and make sure that we're covering all the topics that are relevant. But I think at this point, I'd love to hear a little bit more from what people think in terms of priorities and focus, given the importance of energy costs and meeting some of these broader energy issues.
Great. Thank you. So I think the same questions as the last round, identifying really what are the most important topics within this, the things to cover, any things you want to change about the framing here, and suggestions about information needs and sources. So Heather, turning to you.
Thanks so much, Stacey. So a couple of things come to mind just in hearing the survey responses as well as Selena's outline. The first is around transparency and information about data centers' electric load. Right now, large loads can interconnect by requesting that interconnection from the utility. That's kind of our current model. It happens largely without PUC review unless there's a special rate contract that's requested. And it's sort of up to the utility to figure out if they have enough headroom on their system and what the cost of any upgrades that would be needed would be. And then the interconnecting load would pay for those upgrades and off to the races. And so I think we're interested in injecting some transparency into that, particularly because while it's fairly easy to assign the cost causation piece of like the actual poles and wires that might be needed or substation upgrade that might be needed to have a big load in a particular part of our grid, it's really hard to assign the costs of, for example, capacity in our New England energy market to the causer of the need for that additional capacity, which might be that big load. But because of the way our supply market works, similar to PJM, we could have a really hard time assigning out those costs to the actual data centers who are causing them. I am also very concerned about missed opportunities. So if we push data centers off the grid and ask them to just build all kinds of behind the meter generation and take themselves out of the equation, we might actually miss the opportunity that Selena was talking about for ratepayer savings. And so I would encourage us to think about the word flexibility, flexible interconnection, when we're thinking about energy requirements here, and injecting the idea of requiring the data centers to have load flexibility, particularly during peak or very expensive times on the grid. This could consist of them having the batteries, backup generation, or existing cogeneration at some of the industrial sites that might be repurposed. And I think somebody mentioned biomass earlier as a potential as well. So just wanted to add those concepts into the mix and look forward to really engaging on this part of the conversation.
Great, thanks, Heather. Carrie.
Yeah, so I guess I have a question because we're going to be looking at a lot of these things in our PUC docket, and there'll be opportunities for stakeholders to participate in that. And so I was curious if there had been thought put into how the two processes sort of feed into one another. And then then I also wanted to say that in what I'm hoping to see from this process, one thing that I mentioned was thinking about finding ideal locations for data center development, and it's the electric grid is definitely a place where areas could be identified. But I also wanted to highlight what Heather said, and something to remember is that if a data center wants to interconnect in a weak part of the grid and they pay for lots of upgrades, that could actually benefit other ratepayers. So, and I think that there are ways that we could design tariffs that could bring benefits to all Maine customers. And so we need to be really intentional about how we think about that. And so, yeah, that's all I have to say, I think, for now.
Thanks, Carrie. I don't know, Selena, do you want to try to answer the question about overlap with the PUC docket?
Yeah, Carrie, I think that's a very important question. My intention is to work closely with the commission and with Chair Bartlett on this council to make sure that we're sharing out the work that is happening. And given the level of detail that's going to happen at the PUC, it's probably it's fine for people to engage in both, but we want to make sure that whatever the key components we're bringing back to the council, so it's not an expectation that all council members will need to participate or watch the PUC process, although they're more than happy to, we're more than happy to have.
And we would love to have everyone participate in the PUC process, but we know that that might not be feasible, but we'd love to have a, sort of wider set of voices than we typically have. So,
thanks. Great. Thanks. Erica?
It's just kind of playing onto the comments, building upon the comments that have been made by Carrie and Heather. And there are ways to do this through the tariff design. It might end up being that that's more where the PUC process goes. But as a utility, we have an obligation to connect all customers. So for us, in some ways, it's not different than a new manufacturing facility or other things from the connection piece. And we'd be obviously looking to make sure that the cost causer absorbs the costs that they create. and just the nature. So from the perspective of the utility, we'd be looking at what is the nature and like why are these things different than perhaps some other types of customers that would be connecting. And I think there's examples in Canada, we put caps on the amount of new data centers that could connect to the grid without bringing new generation. And I know in parts of the US, there have been tariffs that have already been developed, and we'll likely be digging into that in the PUC process. But one of the important parts there is, there are concerns about, is this real load? Is this coming and it's going to stay for the long term? Or is it something there's a lot of kind of gold rush theory about, and then it's not actually going to remain? And so you see in some of the tariff designs that those get addressed through things like collateral requirements, deposits, so that if you go about building out reinforcements to the grid, it's not that the counterparty isn't there a year later to pay for the things that they've caused. Some of those things will be important as we look at the design to make sure that if we are building long-term assets and expecting to collect back over time the costs of those developments, that's done in a way that makes sure that the interests are protected. And I do agree with the comment Heather made that we believe there are examples where adding additional customer usage to the grid, you basically are dealing with fixed assets that the cost of the assets does not change. They just have to be divided among all the customers using them. So if you add more customers to that mix or more usage from customers to that mix, we do believe that there is an opportunity in the right set of circumstances to reduce the wires charges for customers in Maine. So we're very interested in exploring that because we recognize the affordability challenges that people are facing in the state.
Yeah, great. So I'm hearing a lot of focus around this real question about the opportunities for actual savings for ratepayers using data centers, and the conversation about how to identify those and put the structures in place to make those most likely. Am I getting that right, Erica?
Yeah, that's right. I think just generally, the more customers that are using the grid, the lower per customer cost is for everyone. So from just an economic growth perspective, we're happy for more customers in kind of whatever way that is. It just has to be done in a way that protects customers who aren't driving the costs.
Yeah, great.
But generally speaking, economic growth and more usage of the grid would bring the costs overall down for individual customers.
Thanks, Erica. Bill?
Yeah, I had two comments. Echo what Erica mentioned. Quebec, anything over 5 megawatts in Quebec, they double the rate for new data center development, which offsets the ratepayers for the balance of the grid. The second notion I wanted to bring up is from another region, is also looking at grid stability. And if we bring in data center development, the backup generators that were referred to earlier, which are a necessity, leveraging those for peak shaving as well as black start opportunities. We currently just have our hydros in Wyman for black start. We could leverage data center development for additional black start capacity.
Thanks, Bill. Can you just say a little more about that if there are people who don't know what you mean?
Yeah, black start generation facilities. They're looked at across the nation right now for security. If our grid was to go black, most power plants can't restart without power. Maine is fortunate with our hydro stations. The majority of them are black start, and then Wyman Station is also a black start power plant. But the more black start capability we have, the quicker we can bring the grid back online if we have an issue.
Great, thank you. Okay. Giovanna.
Thank you. So my comment is related. We talked about dynamic loads on the grid related to data centers. And also there was a comment at the beginning related to defining grid priorities during emergencies. That is also related to what Bill was saying. So the comment that I wanted to make was to bring this at the forefront and also identify some sources that we have also in the state. We have many researchers that have worked to develop digital twins for optimizing dynamic load on the grids. And so as we go along in this conversation, I think it would be good to pull also from the knowledge that is being developed by researchers in the state to make sure we optimize the solutions.
Great, thanks. So really thinking about who we can tap into to help provide some of this information and identifying researchers who have already built some of the models around dynamic loading that we might want to put into place. Great. Jack?
Yeah, really appreciate all the comments that have been made, and I think it is, really important that we avoid some of like the negative scenarios, right? Like a large data center with like behind the meter, like a giant behind the meter gas plant that doesn't provide any benefits to the grid, but competes for gas supply during, the peak moments that actually drive grid costs already. I mean, we just need to be really mindful of something like that. Also, yeah, appreciate the mention of sort of like trying to get I think we would be in strong support of identifying what the sort of right large load tariff is for data centers and what are the different aspects of that. And I know there's a lot of work that many people have done on that. I know the Lawrence Berkeley Labs folks have already been really active in sort of scoping out some of the different options there and addressing, as folks said, some of the issues around potential speculation. These infrastructure investments are really long-lived, and so the making sure that we're protecting ratepayers against the possibility that you might trigger some of those costs without someone being able to bear them. But the other thing I want to just put on the table is the one of the benefits that we potentially see is around the requirements around supply and flexibility. And one of the long-term pathways for affordability in Maine is, getting more out of the grid that we already have broadly. And so how do we move towards facilitating the use of aggregated load flexibility and demand management, and what's the role of like a new major customer that is potentially sort of well funded as part of this big investment boom in sort of facilitating that market coming into being. So that's something that we're interested in exploring too.
Great. Thanks, Jack. All right. So I am going to try and share what I think I have heard so far. So David, if you want to take your screen down, I will put mine up. And slightly messier version here, but hopefully it's something good for us to talk through. So here's some of what we've heard so far. And again, really eager to hear people's thoughts of what's missing, what I got right or wrong here. Hearing about transparency and information to make sure that there actually is the ability to assign costs. And the current process might not have enough transparency right now to make that easy. This really big theme of seeking real benefits for ratepayers and communities by making sure we don't just push them off the grid and miss those opportunities, try to get more out of the grid that we have with aggregated load flexibility. Think about these battery and cogen options, maybe for peak times or for backups. Finding the locations where there are opportunities to strengthen the grid and new users might be able to come in and do that. We need to continue to work closely with the PUC and make sure these two processes are really working together there, both for the benefit of all of the council members, as well as for the public who are invited to participate in both in both processes. Thinking about tariff design, and to make sure again that the people who are causing the costs absorb the cost, and some models on how to make sure that the rate increases at a point at a certain cap when there's a requirement to add new power. Need to make sure that whoever is going to be paying for this is going to be around to pay for it. And if they're not around, what kind of mechanisms are there to ensure that takes place? And increasing Black Start security measures, or really paying attention to the Black Start piece of this puzzle. And then a couple of information sources. People mentioned researchers who've built some models around dynamic loads, and national lab research around the protecting against abandoned investments, and making sure that the people who are on the hook to pay for these things are actually around to do so. So let me know, what did I miss? What do you want to add to this or clarify from these points? Did I get these right? Are these helpful, Selena, in helping you frame up sort of next steps for the conversation? Brendan.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's important to put in here, those are all really great considerations, but if it's not financially viable, then there'll be no interest in the endeavor. And so it's really important to keep that front and center, that it has to be financially viable for data center owners to want to invest in the space, so that the state can receive the benefits if it's done well. We want to keep that front and center, or else we'll do all this work and there'll be no takers and interest.
I agree with that.
Great. Adding that point in. Anything else we're missing here in terms of really thinking about the priorities?
I think just important to keep in mind the concept we talked about at the beginning about balance. So you can look for like protections and things like that. But if you make it so restrictive, you're not going to be competitive with other jurisdictions. So if it's something that the state decides the trade-offs are appropriate, and it's something we would like to try to attract, then we can't be at the far end of the curve on, it just economically unfeasible, commercially unfeasible. And so as we talk about these things and like trying to protect customers and that the environmental trade-offs and the community trade-offs, if we land at a place where we're the most stringent on every one of those things, there's not going to be the opportunity to benefit from some of the things that they will bring.
Yeah. So, and that sort of speaks to the making sure you're also considering the broader, where does Maine fit in the landscape overall?
Yeah, and it's sort of the question I ask a lot around, just not just on this issue, but generally, it's like, well, what happens if they come here? And then you have to ask the companion question, what happens if they don't? What happens if they go everywhere else? And we've created an environment where it just doesn't work. And if that is a decision, so that's okay, but being intentional if that's the decision, that you're trading off some of the benefits that you could realize as well.
Yeah. I think that speaks to the, a need to actually also think about what gets lost, right? If you don't have if Maine is not putting itself in a position to participate in this part of the economy.
Yeah, and it's just another place where when we talk about that, because this is titled energy, I think it will be important for us to separately break out like the supply side versus, because that has its own environmental issues compared to the delivery side, because the challenges and opportunities are different in those two buckets.
Heather?
Yeah, I think I just want to caution about the idea that we want to be actively competing with other states, even if the benefits to ratepayers aren't there. So I guess I want to just, again, I think the concept of balance is the right way to approach this. But there are other states that have, made it very affordable and very attractive for data centers to come in. And that makes it affordable for data centers, but the impact on ratepayers has been catastrophic in some of those places. The cost of electricity is already very high in Maine. And so if there is a data center that can come to Maine and can help us lower those costs, then great. But we should not be throwing money at some of the wealthiest companies in the world in order to attract them here. So I think Brandon just agreed with that. I think I just wanted to clarify that we're not out to set up a structure where we're really enticing data centers. If there's one for whom it makes sense and there are ratepayer benefits, then let's figure out the right way to do that. Make sure we maximize those benefits to Mainers. But attracting these things to our state isn't necessarily the right kind of economic development for the state, because we know it doesn't bring a ton of new jobs with it.
Yeah. All right.
We're aligned.
Yeah.
Great.
And Carrie,
Yeah.
let's take your comment, and then I think we're going to need to transition to our third topic.
Okay, sorry, I was gonna not comment, but then when we got into this idea of trying to compete with other states, I just felt like I should jump in. I mean, I go to a lot of conferences, and the message we get at the conferences is the data centers have a lot of money, and so we should be trying, and they're desperate to bring these data centers online, and so they're trying to figure out any way they can to do it. And I think I would just caution us trying to compete, because as I think, as already been mentioned, we already have very high electric prices in Maine. So we have a lot of factors that aren't that attractive. So I wouldn't want us to try to undercut ourselves. And the way I see this framework laid out is we're going to learn about the economic development benefits. And I think understanding what those are will help us decide basically how much we could, like, if it was this huge opportunity, then yes, we should be discounting and trying to attract, but if it's not, we shouldn't. So I'm basically saying I think we should keep an open mind about what the economic development opportunity is, but then also remember that these companies are really desperate to bring their resources online, and so we want to make sure we extract all the benefits we can for Maine ratepayers. And so that's very important to me, and I think everyone at the commission. So anyway, thanks.
Great. So I think there's alignment there. It's not just let's be competitive for the sake of it, but let's really make sure that the benefits are worthwhile for
Yes, exactly. Thanks.
Okay.
We're going to need to switch gears here, folks. We're going to run out of time.
Doing now. So David, let me hand it back to you to just give an overview of questions that we had.
David, you're muted.
It's so exciting to talk to myself. Sorry about that. I was going to say this is the same situation as before. These are the summary of comments, and we sort of gathered into this. It's not just economic impacts; it's really economic impacts and community development and sort of community control and things like that. So here, these are what you might expect, but it's interesting to see them. One is job quality and quantity, like really how many jobs do these facilities create, both in their construction and in their ongoing work? What is that impact on tax revenues, fiscal, municipal impact? Like, what does this really mean? Can we get our hands around that a little bit more? Community benefits agreements. Is this a thing? Like, how could this work for these? What might that look like? Are there examples elsewhere that we could pull on? What would make this actually positive for a community? think there's a number of comments in the survey about brownfield and industrial redevelopment, like what's come up in our conversation. Interesting to see that in the survey as well. Can we steer data centers to those types of situations? And then there's a number of comments around home rule and citizen voice, like a lot of comments on this, right? Which is sort of like who gets to decide here? How is the state most helpful in this? Like, how do we deal with the fact? And I think Emily, you had mentioned this earlier, like the decision of one community, how it impacts another community, how it impacts other state, other like the whole state. How are citizen voices coming through in all this process? So the sort of process piece and the governance piece around it is a big piece of a lot of the input that came in through the survey. So with that, let me forward over to or send you over to Selena, who can say, all right, so given that, this is what we see this group working on.
Thanks, David. That was a helpful conversation on the energy front, and think that there's a lot of need for prioritization, and I think that that's also important here as well. Obviously, economic and community development safeguards, processes, and opportunities will vary depending on individual communities, the specific project proposals, the location, and we recognize and understand that there is an important role for communities to exercise their own processes and tools to ensure that potential economic development aligns with community needs and priorities. And so it's also important to look at public services and other needs that communities have when planning these when projects are being planned. We've discussed community benefits agreements, both in terms of the public feedback that we got, but thinking about when data center proposals come forward, how can we learn about what has worked elsewhere, that balance between financial viability of projects, but also making sure that they are designed in a way that is beneficial to the communities if they choose to have them, and that really maximize those any sort of community benefits for local municipalities. We are joined by Mo Terry from the Department of Economic and Community Development, and I'll welcome any additional thoughts she has when I'm finished here. But we are, overall, DECD creates a 10-year economic strategy for the state that outlines our key focus areas and trying to grow economic opportunities and look at ways to collaborate, whether it's through regional planning organizations or local communities, and ways to really push forward in terms of ways to grow the state's economy that is helpful for a lot of reasons, including on the energy side. And there are significant challenges associated with building investment in the state. Obviously, I think there's broad support for looking at how to take advantage or better utilize existing infrastructure when it comes to previous industrial sites, whether it's brownfields or old mills. And so I think we have done work in the Department of Energy Resources, providing technical assistance to communities to think about how to reimagine those sites. I think that's an important conversation here to have in terms of what it might mean to for this context of data centers and what may be feasible or not at some of those locations. And I'll say a couple things. One is that the DECD was also directed by the legislature to take a look at the existing landscape of state business incentives and whether they are applicable to data centers. And so just like the Public Utilities Commission has a parallel process, DECD will have a separate process on its review of incentives, and will look to the DECD to bring that information to the council so we can be informed by that. That report is due to the legislature by November, so before we finish our process here. And then I think the last thing, actually there are two more things I want to mention. One is a lot of conversation and discussion around what are the job opportunities around data centers? What does it mean in terms of economic development? The duration of those jobs, or the quality of those jobs. So that's something that we're going to want to really understand, and especially when thinking about the scale. When we're talking about a 20 megawatt project, that's very different than a 100 plus megawatt project in terms of the type of economic development that may or may not come from it. And I'm also very sensitive to the conversation around large load in the state, and not inadvertently impacting other economic opportunities, whether it be manufacturing or industrial activities that could be inadvertently impacted by any sort of requirements that we put on specific to data centers. And so we want to make sure that the people who are invested in the state, the industrial activities and potential new economic opportunities in the state really see that we are interested in growing that base and want to make sure that the policies around here don't inadvertently do that. But I'm confident that we can figure out how to do that in the right way that also balances the community concerns and other questions that have come up. So I'll pause there, and I'm really curious to hear what people have to say in terms of what we missed and how to prioritize this work and what information is needed.
Great. So just reminder, like we're really looking to prioritize the conversation we'll have. We don't need to get into the conversation today. But if you look at what Selena just put out there and you think about what's most important for you, if you were to say, yeah, let's really invest time in this thing, what would that be? Or if you have some ideas about who could put some useful information on the table, we'd love to see that. Um, great. And obviously, Melanie, if you've got anything to add as well, please. And Maureen, jump right in.
I think the only thing that I maybe want to add to the ask of people to think about would be to explore if DECD can be helpful in other ways in this conversation, as well as specific data center understanding and being able to provide the right guidance to communities. Is there something in the infrastructure of this that the department can be helpful with? Is there something that we have been working on, again, going back to what Selena said about the strategic plan, if there is a path on there that we want to make sure that we're capturing with what the what this conversation brings. For instance, the university, as well as other educational institutions, are very focused on R&D, and what does that mean for us in the data center world? So just some sort of, I guess, extra thoughts to put into this that can be more specific, but also will, kind of help the state as a whole, not just for what the end result of this will be.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah. Andrew?
Thanks, David. To add on to, I think, Mo, what you're identifying, I mean, we've talked in the other domains a good amount about identifying co-benefits to maximize opportunity and to mitigate harm. I think as we sort of prioritize areas of focus within the economic realm, I think it is important. We had some of this conversation in the AI task force as we look at any type of data center development. There is the very real power and electric input and output implications. In the same vein, there are inputs from a data transport and storage implication that do inform a broader regional and international network. So I think really being thoughtful and identifying the data transport, the fiber implications and potential opportunities, I think is an area to understand and to give some more specific parameters to with some of the product of this process. And to really sort of boil that down, right, when you look at a utility pole, the top part is the transport of electricity, and the bottom portion is the transport of the communications. And so I think this is true when we think about what data centers' primary function is a destination and a intermediary of data transportation. And so we have to think about that a lot as far as the network that we both are supporting and contributing to.
Thanks, Andrew. We're glad you're here to help us parse through that. Brendan?
Yeah, I just want to add, it's a good point, Andrew, and I think it's important to add to the consideration here. There's a single pipe basically from Bangor all the way down to Boston. And whenever it gets broken, we lose service and we move to cell phones and a few low bandwidth backup mechanisms up in Bar Harbor, which stops all our data replication. We frequently, we do not have massive amounts of data compared to a lot of institutes. We frequently saturate our pipe, between Connecticut and Maine doing data replication. So, any data center is going to have to invest a lot of money in those. There's just not enough fiber in the state going out to any of these sites. And so I think it's an important point for consideration because it's going to become part of any of these projects.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah. Jack?
Yeah, just real quick, a lot of these are really important. I just spotlight the potential opportunity around brownfield cleanup. If we talked a couple times throughout the meeting about like what sites would be good. And that seems to jump out as one that's a possibility. If we can get all the rest of the frameworks right. And I think it's especially interesting because some of the brownfields have existing electricity infrastructure at least already. So there could be some good overlays there if we can, cross-reference all of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. All right, folks, we're kind of running out of time. Any last quick thing on this? I've written down, I'm not even going to share, but I've written down, DCD as an offer to like, hey, how do we think about this weaving into our other streams of work? And then we spent a little time talking about the implications for transport of data and the fiber implications, and could there be opportunities to strengthen Maine's fiber and communications network through something like this? And then Jack's last point around brownfield and really thinking about siting as a key piece of this. Okay. Any last thing on this?
I would just add one other thing that
Yeah.
we should look at, and that is the impacts to existing industries. And Brendan's example is a good one. If we had a data center outside of Bangor and a brownfield site, he wouldn't have to wheel all the way to Connecticut for his backup server.
Right. Enabling industries in Maine that otherwise feel a little abandoned in their infrastructure. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, thank you. What we wanted to end our meeting, we're going to end at the top of the hour. We're just going to say a word about next steps. But before we do, Stacy and I have been referencing this idea of reaching out to those of you who have been able to hang on throughout this meeting. And we really want to open up to everyone who's here observing and being part of our meeting today and through a Menti poll. And so RT or I, one of us will drop in the chat in just a second a poll. We've got 3 questions for folks, and it's really about following up on these topical pieces that we just worked on, right? Is this council setting itself up to focus on the right areas? Like what's most important to you? Okay. So, RT, if you have that handy, if not, I will drop it in the chat. We have a link. There it is. Thanks, RT. And I will get it going just a second. Okay, so the first question you can see, which of these advisory council topics is most essential in your view? We asked just one word because this is a little word cloud piece. We're going to do some longer things later. But just in a word, which of these advisory council topics is most essential in your view? I invite everyone who wants to jump in and answer that. In just a second, I'll show you what is showing up on the screen for me. Let's get a few more. Okay, you all now will be able to see what I'm seeing. Thanks, everyone. Keep dropping some words in there. Okay. All right, council, it seems pretty clear, right? The things you've been working on are resonating with folks out there, right? Energy, environment, balance. Environment shows up in a couple different ways, environmental impacts, environment. Okay. All right, we'll take another few words, and then I'm going to go to the next one just because we're going to run out of time here to the top of the hour. All right. So thank you all who have been answering this. I'm going to move forward to the next question. All right. And the next question is, how well do the focus areas that we've been talking about today cover the issues that are most important to you? Okay. How well do these focus areas cover the issues that are most even important to you? All right. I'll say for a little word in a second what happens if you're in the not even close department. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll give it just a second more. All right. We know this is an extremely tough issue to work on. And so as we go into the next step slide, we'll talk about if you're one of those folks who's feeling a little so-so or not even close, how to get your word in here to make sure that what's concerning to you shows up in the conversations that we all have. Okay, one more question, then we got to finish up our day. What might these focus areas, how might these focused areas be improved? All right, so this is an opportunity to do a short answer. A short phrase is usually the easiest thing to do. A quick short phrase. I'm going to drop my screen for a second, let a couple things come up. But quickly, how might these focus areas be improved? We'll give it a sec. Okay, I'm going to share my screen so you all can see what's coming in. You can take a look just as I'm taking a look here. Okay, I see a number of things here that's about who's involved, right? Meaningful public voice, worker input, people first, and also a piece around, hey, do no harm. Let's make sure we're clear on that. Okay. And then some details about this. Tribal voices involved. Consider the benefits equally to the concerns. So some of these things are going to come in, and Selena and Melanie, you're going to have to talk about well, this piece is what we can work on, and that piece is being dealt with in some other process. Maybe an ethics piece, we can talk about how that's going to be dealt with elsewhere. Talking about review misinformation, comparing, consider impacts. Okay, this is what we're going to do. We don't have a lot of time to look at this right now. We will summarize this in the meeting summary and make sure that this gets captured well. And so counselors will get this back to you so you have a chance more calmly to look at these inputs that are coming in. Thanks everyone for these inputs. Maybe we'll even ask AI to do a quick thing. According to Menti AI, there's a lot about community involvement, expert consultation, energy considerations, and local benefits, as well as ethical standards, environmental impact, transparency mechanisms, and some other things. Okay, so that's a quick summary of what this is. All right, so thank you, folks. Speaking of how to stay involved, here's a next step slide. I'm going to turn it back over to Selena to walk us through our next steps. And then we'll close at the top of the hour. So Selena, back to you.
Great. Thank you everyone for the time and commitment to the conversation today. I really appreciate, I think we made some progress in terms of having a better understanding of areas to focus on, which will help us develop the agenda for the future meetings, including the first meeting. next first upcoming meeting. All the materials related to this meeting will be available online on our website that's linked there, including the recording, slides, meeting summary. We have the current survey that is available. We can share a link to that. We'll keep that open for one more week. And so if there's content that you didn't hear today and you really want to make sure that we hear, that's a good way to get your input in through this process. The next council meeting will be on June 23rd from 2 to 5. You can register for a link on that. It's also available on our website for more information. We have a Department of Energy Resources newsletter. For the Data Center Council, we have a unique email update that we're sending. So please make sure that you subscribe to receive those email updates. The next slide, if you can go to that, has a QR code so people can follow up and join to get updates on future meetings. And thank you for everyone for participating and for joining this council and being part of this process.
Thanks, Selena. And with that, we're done today. Thanks, everyone. It's tough to do 2.5 hours in Zoom like this with no break. I think we may add a break next time, but we really appreciate everyone hanging in with us. We'll see you on June 23rd. Everyone who joined us today, please sign up for the email update. Stay tuned for the next survey that comes out in addition to answering what's out there now. Be well, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.